This is Midnight Broadcast, and tonight we open a drawer in time. Tucked between the pages of a forgotten journal are the letters she never sent. Some stories don't need ghosts to haunt them. Some hearts echo longer than voices. Tonight, we return to 1946, to a love that bloomed in silence and withered in secrets. It began in the quiet aftermath of war, in a small coastal town called Fair Harbor, where the sea whispered secrets to anyone who would listen. The year was 1946. The world was patching itself back together, sewing wounds that ran deeper than maps or borders. Soldiers had come home with medals and haunted eyes, and women had learned how to live with both strength and silence. Eleanor Whitmore lived in the house on Lantern Hill, a modest, ivy-covered cottage with creaking floors and a chimney that smoked like it had stories to tell. She had once been the kind of girl who laughed easily, whose hands smelled of ink and old books. During the war, she had worked in a telegram office, sending and receiving words that changed lives, some that began with, "We regret to inform you," and others that ended with, "Coming home soon." Her own love story was a different sort of message, one that never reached its intended destination. The drawer was in her bedroom, third one down, a little warped at the corners from years of humidity and salt air. Inside it were dozens of letters, all addressed to one man, Henry Archer. Each one written in careful script, dated, signed, but never sent. Some were long, filled with pages of emotions she dared not speak aloud. Others were short, just a line or two, words she scribbled in the middle of sleepless nights. She hadn't seen Henry in 3 years. They had met before the war, on a summer evening at the town library. He had been reading Leaves of Grass, and she was returning a copy of Jane Eyre. Their conversation began with a shared fondness for words and ended months later, with fingers brushing on park benches, with letters sent across oceans and battlefields. But the last letter she had from him was dated September 1943. After that, silence. No return address, no official telegram, no body. Just nothing. And so she wrote, August 12th, 1944. Henry, I dreamed you stood at the foot of my bed last night. You didn't say a word, but your eyes looked the way they used to when you didn't want to leave, when the morning came too soon. I reached for you, and my hand touched only the cold air. She wrote letters when it rained, when the light hit the kitchen tiles a certain way, when the sea called out in tones that sounded like his voice. She wrote on his birthday. She wrote on the day she saw a man on the train who walked like him. She wrote when she heard a song he once hummed off-key. The town whispered about her, called her the letter lady, though always gently, with a mixture of pity and admiration. Some said she was waiting. Others said she was mourning something that wasn't even confirmed. A few said she was mad. But Eleanor didn't much care. She had her routine. She had her house. She had her drawer full of ghosts. It was a Sunday in late October when she received the letter. Not one she wrote. No. This one came by post. Crisp envelope, yellowed just enough to suggest it had traveled far and long. No return address, just her name, her full name. Eleanor Margaret Whitmore. Written in a hand she hadn't seen in 3 years. She stood there on the porch, letter trembling in her fingers. The air was still, the trees outside already bare, their leaves scattered like pages. She didn't open it right away. Instead, she sat on the old bench Henry had built before he left, fingers brushing the edges of the envelope as if trying to read the letter through touch alone. When she opened it, it began simply, Ellie, if you're reading this, it means I made it far enough to post it. Maybe not far enough to come back. I can't say where I am, not for any reason, but that I truly don't know anymore. But I think of you when I close my eyes. You live in the parts of my mind that haven't been shelled or broken. Her breath caught. The ink was faint, the script rougher than she remembered. But it was him. No doubt, his cadence, his strange way of always apologizing before saying something beautiful. I never meant to disappear. I didn't die, Ellie. But I got lost in something I didn't know how to explain. The war doesn't just take your time, it takes your direction. I've wandered too long, but every road leads back to you in my mind. I just didn't know if you'd still want to hear from me. That night, she didn't sleep. She read the letter by candlelight, then reread it, and then she opened the drawer, pulled out one of her own letters, June 6, 1945, and read it aloud as if he were in the room. She didn't know where to send her reply, but she wrote it anyway. October 29th, 1946. Henry, I got your letter. I didn't think I ever would. I'd stopped believing in anything arriving, by ship, by post, by chance. I want you to know I never hated you. I just hated not knowing. I wrote to you every week. I never stopped, even when the seasons did. I have a drawer full of things you never read, but maybe that doesn't matter, because you were always with me anyway. Eleanor. She folded the letter slowly, slipped it into an envelope without an address, and tucked it into the drawer. That was the truth of her correspondence. It was never meant for the mail. It was meant for preservation, for keeping her heart alive. But the next morning, there was another letter. This time, it was left on her windowsill. Same handwriting. No envelope. Just a folded page weighted down by a stone, one Henry had once found on the beach and shaped into a paperweight. Her breath caught. She hadn't seen that stone in years. Had he come back? Was he here now? Ellie, I'm near. I don't know how long I can stay, but I wanted to see the sea again. I wanted to see if Fair Harbor still had light in its windows, if you still wrote letters in your kitchen. I saw your silhouette last night. You haven't changed. Or maybe you have, and I still love you anyway. I left this where you used to leave poems for me, in case you ever looked again. She did look. She looked everywhere. That morning she went into town, eyes scanning every bench, every cafe table, every corner of the pier. Nothing. No sign of him. Just the knowing smiles of neighbors who were already beginning to gossip. Eleanor Whitmore, standing still in the marketplace like a statue carved from longing. Back home, she sat by the window for hours, fingers twitching over paper and pen, but she couldn't write. Not yet. She needed more than ink. She needed a voice. The days grew shorter. Autumn gave way to the first frost. Henry left another note 3 days later, this time hidden in the book return slot at the library. Ellie, do you still read at night? I do. Not often. My hands shake sometimes. My eyes hurt. But I read the sea around us again and thought of you. Thought of how you once said the sea was the only honest thing in the world. I don't know what I'm trying to say. I guess I want to see you, but I'm scared I'll ruin whatever picture of me you've kept. Maybe I already have. She didn't sleep that night. She sat on the bench again, the one he built. This time, she brought a candle and one of the letters from the drawer. She read it aloud to the night. December 24th, 1944. Henry, it's Christmas Eve. I made your favorite, molasses cookies. I even left one on the windowsill like I used to, before we'd pretend Santa left you a whole plate. The house feels empty tonight. The fire's crackling, but it doesn't warm anything but my hands. I want to believe you're out there, that maybe you'll come home and find the cookie and me both waiting. She tucked the old letter under her coat, clutched the new one to her chest, and whispered his name. The next day, she wrote her reply directly onto a piece of scrap paper, and left it beneath the bench. "Henry, come at dusk. I'll be here. I want to see you. No words, no letters, just come." She waited. Dusk turned to evening. The sky painted itself in shades of longing, blue and gold and finally ink black. The street lamp flickered on. The town grew quiet, and then she heard footsteps. Soft at first, hesitant, the crunch of gravel. And then there he was, older, thinner. His hair was shorter, his coat worn and patched, but it was him, the Henry from her memories and her letters and her sleepless nights. His eyes met hers and didn't look away. She didn't cry. Not right then. She simply stood, walked toward him, and said, "I kept every word." He smiled. "I was hoping you would." That night, they sat in the kitchen by candlelight. No electricity, just habit, just atmosphere. She poured tea. He brought out the old deck of playing cards, and for a while they were simply Henry and Eleanor again. The world outside could wait. He told her everything in time. About the injury, the confusion, the long weeks in a hospital with no name, about the drifting that followed, the fear of writing, the shame of not being the same man who left. "I didn't think I was worthy of coming back to you," he said. "I thought you deserved better than a man who'd forgotten how to speak without stammering." She reached for his hand. "I didn't want better. I wanted you." They didn't speak of forever that night. They spoke only of tomorrow, and when the candle burned low, she rose and opened the drawer. "This," she said, "is yours." She handed him the stack, dozens of letters tied with ribbon, edges curled with time. He touched them like they were made of gold. "I'll read one every day," he said. She smiled. "I'll write more." In the weeks that followed Henry's letter from Berlin, the air in Eliza's little flat thickened with a strange hush. It wasn't silence. No, it was a soundless waiting, like a needle suspended above a groove, trembling but not yet dropped. Each day she went to work at the post office, filed telegrams that arrived brittle with war stories and heartbreak, smiled at neighbors who didn't ask how she was. And each evening, she returned to her writing desk, picked up her pen, and added another letter to the growing stack she never intended to send. June 10th, 1946. Eliza wrote, "I saw Mrs. Hemsworth today. She asked about you, still calls you the boy with the dimpled chin, though she hasn't seen you since 1939. She says I look thinner. I told her everyone looks thinner these days. What I didn't say was that I miss you more acutely in the spring, when the smell of newspaper ink and lilacs converge. That was always your season, wasn't it? Daring enough to dream, but too proud to speak of it." The sound of the ink scratching across paper became her evening prayer, a tether to something real. Not just to Henry, but to the version of herself that once felt things without hesitation. Sun on skin, breathless kisses at train platforms, dreams bigger than ration books and blackout curtains. Her letters grew longer, sometimes 3 or 4 in a night. She no longer pretended they'd be mailed. She didn't need them to be. She needed only to write. And yet, there was a quiet ache in her bones, like they remembered the way Henry once held her. Fingers gentle but sure. A man doesn't vanish from a woman like that. Not entirely. Even ghosts leave traces. Eliza wasn't waiting for a knock at the door, but she wasn't finished saying goodbye either. Then, one morning, her landlady handed her a pale blue envelope. The handwriting made her heart stumble. Neat, American, familiar, Henry. She stood on the landing for 10 minutes before opening it. Her hands trembled, not because she feared what it said, but because a letter from the past has a weight the future can't carry. It read, "Dear Eliza, I know I forfeited the right to write to you. I know silence is its own kind of cruelty, but Berlin changes a man. War does something no uniform prepares you for. I didn't write because I didn't want to lie to you. But now, with the ruins around me and the world trying to rebuild itself, I see what matters. I miss you. I miss the girl with ink on her fingers and that fierce, quiet laugh. If you're still there, I'll be in London for a week. Room 209, the Camden Arms. I'll be there on the 17th. If you can forgive a coward, come knock on my door. No signature, no return address, just the invitation and the date, only a few days away. Narrator. That night, Eliza didn't write a letter. She sat at her desk and stared at the window. Outside, the city glowed faintly under a bruised sky, the kind of blue that hangs just before dawn. A threshold color. A maybe. Should she go? She folded the letter, placed it inside the same drawer where all her unwritten responses lived. And then she pulled out one of her oldest letters, written on Victory in Europe Day. A letter she'd poured her soul into. The one where she told Henry she'd waited through the war, but she wouldn't wait through silence. She reread it now. All the heartbreak and longing returned like a tide. And yet, beneath it, something lighter. A possibility. The 17th arrived like thunder wrapped in velvet. Eliza, dressed in her softest navy blue dress, pinned her hair like she used to, and walked to the Camden Arms with her hands deep in her coat pockets. Room 209 was 2 flights up, past faded wallpaper and echoes of footsteps. She stood before the door and knocked. No answer. She knocked again, a little softer this time. Still, no sound. She checked her watch. The time was right. The day was right. Had she misunderstood? Or had he changed his mind? Just as she turned to leave, the door creaked open. Standing there wasn't the boy she remembered, but a man. Older, tired around the eyes. But it was him, Henry. He didn't speak at first, just looked at her like she was a memory made real. "Eliza?" he said, voice rough with something unspoken. She nodded, her throat too tight to reply. They stood in silence, years folded into the space between them. Then, finally, he stepped aside, and she walked in. What followed was not a declaration. No sudden kiss, no strings swelled in the background. Just 2 people sitting across from each other as the city hummed outside. They talked about everything and nothing, about what they read, about the soup in Berlin, about the way silence hurts more than words. And as the clock ticked past midnight, Eliza reached into her bag and handed him one of her letters, the one she'd written a year ago, about spring, about longing, about lilacs. He read it silently. When he finished, he looked up, tears caught at the edge of his lashes. "I didn't know," he whispered. "I didn't either," she said, "until I wrote it." He reached across the table, took her hand, and in that moment, there were no apologies, no promises, just presence. The next morning, they walked through Hyde Park. The air was soft, the trees whispering in green. They didn't speak much. They didn't need to. She would return to her flat that evening. He would leave London in 2 days. They made no plans. But something had shifted. A letter had been sent. A door had opened. And something that had long been folded was now unfolding. Eliza hadn't expected to feel peace. Not after all those months of unanswered silence, but as she stood at the window of her flat that evening, watching a milkman pass below, she realized it wasn't peace she felt. It was presence, a strange stillness that came not from forgetting, but from having finally said all that needed saying. Henry's touch still lingered on her hand. Not romantic, not even hopeful, just human. just true. That night, she didn't reach for her pen. The desk sat in its familiar corner, the inkwell full, the stack of half-filled pages untouched. But the urgency was gone. The ache had softened into something else. Memory, maybe, or grace. 3 days later, a final letter arrived, postmarked Paris. No return address, just her name written in careful block letters, as if he didn't want the postman to get it wrong. She opened it slowly. Eliza, I'm writing this from a train car that smells like old coal and new beginnings. I'm not sure where I'm headed next. Maybe Vienna, maybe back to the States. But wherever I go, I'll carry yesterday with me. You didn't have to come, but you did. You didn't have to forgive, but you listened. And that matters more than I can say. I won't pretend the world's fixed. I won't ask you to wait, but I will tell you this. You are still the place I go when the world goes quiet. Be well, be brave. H double quote. She folded the letter and placed it with the rest. Not buried, not hidden, but not displayed either. Just kept, like all sacred things. Time went on, as it does. Eliza no longer wrote nightly. But now and then, when the mood struck, when the sky was particularly pale or a smell reminded her of Berlin or jazz drifted from a neighbor's window, she'd take out her pen and write him a note. No address, no envelope, just words. They weren't for him anymore. They were for her. To remember that once, in the aftermath of ruin, two people sat across from each other and chose to speak. Not to erase the silence, but to mark its end. In 1953, Eliza married a kind man named Thomas, who ran the bookshop on Bell Street. He loved her gently, without question. She never spoke of Henry, and Thomas never asked. She still kept her letters. She still remembered. And sometimes, on late afternoons when the rain slid down the glass in soft streaks, she'd find herself thumbing through one of those old pages and thinking, not of the pain, but of the space between two people and how rare it is when that space is crossed with honesty. Henry never wrote again, but his letter remained, creased at the corners, fingerprints faintly pressed into the margins. Proof that once something had been bridged, briefly, beautifully. Eliza died in 1988, quietly, surrounded by books and the scent of lavender. Her husband passed 4 years earlier. When her niece came to sort through the flat, she found the drawer. Inside were over 100 letters. Some dated, some not. All written in the same steady hand, none of them mailed. At first, she thought they were drafts or diary entries, but as she read, she realized they were conversations with a man named Henry, a name no one in the family had ever heard. She kept a few, burned the others at Eliza's request in her will. But one letter she framed. It read, "Some love stories aren't grand. They don't burn, they glow, software constant, quiet as letters folded into drawers. This is Midnight Broadcast, and tonight we opened a drawer in time. Not all hauntings come with chains. Some come in envelopes, in ink, in silence. Not all love stories end in tragedy. Some end in memory, in warmth, in knowing that once love lived here." This was The Letters She Never Sent, brought to you by Midnight Broadcast.